Have you ever picked up an old board and felt certain that it was beyond saving? Have you ever looked at a piece of wood so gray, dry, cracked, and rough that throwing it away seemed like the only sensible choice? Have you ever wondered how something that once looked solid, useful, and quietly dependable could end up looking this exhausted after only a few seasons outside? And is that worn-out appearance really the same thing as deep rot? Or is it possible that what looks ruined is only the outer surface after years of sun-rain oxygen and repeated cycles of wet and dry exposure? Picture a quiet evening in a backyard. The light has softened, the air feels slower. A fence catches the last of the day. Somewhere near the edge of the yard, an old board is lying where no one has bothered to look closely. In a long time, its surface is silver gray. Fine cracks run with the grain. The wood feels rough, dry, and tired. It no longer looks like something that came from a lumber yard with clean edges and warm color. It looks like something that has been slowly stripped of its best qualities by weather and neglect. Most people would see it and make the same decision almost immediately. It is done. It is finished. It belongs in a pile of things that no longer matter. That is the exact moment where the story needs to turn. The worn appearance of outdoor wood does not always mean the entire piece has failed. In many cases, what you are seeing first is surface weathering. Sunlight begins to break down the outer layer. Rain and moisture help carry that damage along. Oxygen time and constant wet-dry cycles keep pushing the surface farther away from the wood it used to be. The result is familiar. The color fades into gray. The texture turns coarse. Small cracks open along the grain. The board begins to look lifeless, even when the deeper material may still be worth saving. That misunderstanding is where a lot of value gets thrown away. The real starting point is not the formula. It is the diagnosis. Once you understand what outdoor exposure actually does to wood, the problem looks different. A weathered board stops being just another dead object in the yard. It becomes a piece of material waiting to be judged more carefully. That is where the true value of this video begins. This is not only about mixing a few common ingredients in a jar, it is about learning to see old wood correctly. It is about knowing that outdoor wood and indoor furniture do not age in the same way, do not need the same kind of care, and should not be treated with the same recipe if you want a good result. Many people think the expensive part of restoration is the cost of products. Very often, the more expensive part is uncertainty. It is not knowing what can still be saved, what should be left alone, and what only needs the right treatment to look dramatically better. When that uncertainty begins to lift the board in front of you, changes meaning. It is still gray. It is still dry. It is still carrying the marks of weather. But now, a different question takes shape. If the surface is what has suffered the most, what can bring back the natural character of the grain in a way that is grounded, practical, and safe? When a board sits outside for long enough, the first thing to change is not always the core of the wood. More often, the first visible damage happens at the surface, where the material has to face sunlight, rain, air, and constant shifts in temperature over months and years. That is why so many people see a silver-gray surface and a few small cracks, and immediately assume the whole piece is rotten. But those are not always the same thing. Some boards really are too far gone and no longer worth restoring. Many others still have solid material beneath the surface, and what makes them look old, tired, and almost lifeless is the outer layer that has been weathered by exposure over time. Outdoor wood ages quietly. Sunlight works on the surface first. Rain and moisture soak in and leave again. Oxygen keeps pushing the change forward. Wet and dry cycles repeat through season after season, and the outer skin of the wood begins to lose the warmth and richness it once had. A smooth face turns rough. A warm brown or golden tone fades into silver gray. Fine checks begin to open with the grain. After enough time, the board starts to look like something that has been drained of character. But in many cases, that story still belongs mostly to the surface. Understanding that changes everything. If a person assumes the wood is deeply rotten, they will likely throw it away without looking twice. If they understand that they may be seeing surface weathering instead, they slow down and examine it more carefully. They notice whether the cracks are only on the outside or whether the structure feels soft and weak. They touch the grain to learn whether it is simply dry and rough or whether it has become spongy and broken down. They begin to ask a better question. Is this only a tired surface, or is the entire piece truly failing? That shift in observation prevents a great many bad decisions before any restoration even begins. This is also the point where a more practical kind of confidence starts to appear. Not every restoration should begin with aggressive sanding, a thick modern coating, or an expensive bottle with impressive branding. If the main problem is a surface that has been dried out, grayed over, and worn down by weather, then the best starting point is to address exactly that condition. The wood needs something that can help lift the dead-looking gray from the outer layer. It needs something that can restore depth to the grain. It needs a treatment that goes into the surface instead of sitting on top as a sticky film that attracts dust and disappointment. Now the old board is no longer just an object that makes someone feel regret. It becomes a clear example of a very useful truth. Outdoor wood often looks far worse at the surface long before it has truly failed from within. Once that truth is understood, the next step becomes much more convincing. A simple mixture can make sense if each part of it has a clear job. One ingredient can help carry. One can help enrich. One can help deal with the weathered outer layer. The board does not need to be disguised. It needs the surface problem to be handled for what it really is. That is why the most natural move from here is to look closely at the mixture itself, understand what each ingredient is doing, and see why this combination fits weathered outdoor wood that still has enough life left to reveal its grain again. Once the problem has been understood correctly, the outdoor mixture no longer sounds like a casual trick passed around without much thought. It begins to make clear practical sense. A surface that has been turned gray, rough, dry, and tired by exposure does not need a heavy coating to hide what happened. It needs a treatment that addresses the condition of the outer layer for what it really is. That is why this formula uses only 3 simple ingredients, and why each one matters for a different reason. The first ingredient is boiled linseed oil. This is the part that gives the wood a sense of life returning to it. As it reaches the surface fibers, it helps deepen the color, bring the grain back into view, and restore some of the warmth that weathered wood has slowly lost through long exposure outdoors. The important thing is not only that the board looks richer in color. The more important change is that the surface stops looking empty and exhausted. The viewer should feel that the oil is not there merely to darken the wood. It is there to help the surface look less starved, less brittle, and less like something that has already reached the end of its useful life. The second ingredient is real turpentine. Its role is not to make the mixture smell strong or sound more traditional. Its real purpose is to reduce the heaviness of the oil, so the treatment can move more easily into the weathered surface instead of remaining on top. On a board that has already been worn down by sunlight, water, oxygen, and years of wet and dry cycles, the goal is not to paint over the damage with shine. The goal is to help the mixture enter the surface that has become dry and depleted. This is where turpentine matters. It acts like a pathway helping the oil travel more effectively and making the restoration feel grounded in function rather than surface appearance alone. The third ingredient is white vinegar. This is often the part that surprises people most, yet it completes the logic of the mixture. The gray layer on outdoor wood is not simply dirt sitting on top. It is part of a weathered, oxidized outer surface that has changed over time. Vinegar helps deal with that tired-looking layer before the oil does its deeper visual work. Because of that, the final result is not just a darker board. It becomes a surface with more depth, clearer grain, and a look that feels as if the wood has been brought back from underneath the weathered skin. Together, these three ingredients form a structure that is easy to remember. One helps enrich the grain. One helps the treatment move inward more effectively. One helps address the faded, weathered outer layer. That is also why this formula fits a very specific kind of job. It is best for outdoor wood that is still structurally sound, but visibly worn at the surface. It is not a miracle for boards that are badly rotted or failing deep inside. It is not meant to rescue wood that has already lost its core strength. But for pieces that still have good material beneath a tired exterior, it gives the viewer something much more useful than vague optimism. It gives them a concrete reason to believe that the board in front of them may still come back beautifully if it is treated in the right way. And once each ingredient has a clear role, the next question naturally becomes impossible to ignore. How should the mixture be made? How should it be applied? And where does the final result truly begin to succeed or fail? Once the three ingredients are in the same jar, the result is no longer determined by the recipe alone. It is determined by how the mixture is brought to the wood. This is where many people use the right ingredients and still fail to get the result they hoped for. The problem is not that the treatment does not work. The problem is that they treat it like a coating that should sit proudly on top of the surface, when what really matters is allowing a weathered board to take in what it needs and then stopping at the right moment. That sense of restraint is what separates a piece of wood that looks naturally restored from one that ends up covered in leftover oil that collects dust and looks heavy. The first step should feel almost simple enough to be overlooked. The surface needs to be cleared of loose dirt, sand, and any debris that is only resting on top. There is no need to begin with complicated machinery or an aggressive process if the main issue is surface weathering. What matters first is giving the wood a clean enough face that the mixture can actually meet the grain. A dry cloth, a soft brush, or a careful wipe is often enough to change the starting point. Once the loose dust is gone, the viewer can see the surface more honestly and understand what the board is asking for. After the mixture has been shaken, well, it should be applied with a cotton cloth or an old brush, always following the direction of the grain. That matters because wood is not a blank surface. It has a natural direction, a structure, a path that has always been there. When the mixture moves with the grain, it is not simply being spread across the board. It is being guided along the material in the way the material itself makes possible. A piece of wood that has dried outdoors for years often responds to that first pass immediately. It begins to take the mixture in. That response is important on an emotional level as well as a practical one. The board no longer feels dead. It reacts. It receives. It shows that something inside it is still there to answer. After the treatment has remained on the surface briefly, the most important stage begins: wiping away the excess. Many people rush this part because they assume a wetter shine means a better result. With this kind of restoration, that instinct leads in the wrong direction. What the wood keeps is what it needed. What remains slick and glossy on the surface should be removed thoroughly. If too much is left behind, it can dry into a tacky layer that traps dust, holds grime, and makes the wood look less natural instead of more alive. The goal is not to leave a film. The goal is to let the surface keep only what it has actually absorbed. There is one small practical tip that can make a visible difference on severely dried wood: warming the mixture slightly before use. It does not need to be heated aggressively or treated like a complicated procedure. Placing the sealed jar in warm water for a short time is often enough to make the mixture feel lighter and move into the surface more easily. It is not a rigid rule for every situation, but for boards that have been stripped of life. By years of weather, it often helps the treatment go in more smoothly. Cold oil tends to sit. Warm oil tends to travel. That small difference can deepen the result without making the process any more difficult. There is also a final point that matters for reasons beyond appearance. Oily rags should never be crumpled up and thrown into a pile after the work is done. They should be laid flat in open air until they are fully dry before disposal. This is not a decorative safety note added for completeness. It is a real part of doing the job responsibly. Once the viewer understands both the method and the caution that belongs with it, the work begins to feel more complete. They are no longer learning only how to improve a gray board. They are learning how to work with material carefully and with respect. And from that point, one important boundary starts to become impossible to ignore. This formula belongs to weathered outdoor wood. Bring it indoors without thinking, and the result can become something very different from restoration. At this point, one boundary needs to be stated very clearly. The formula for outdoor wood is not something that should be brought indoors and applied to every wooden object simply because it worked beautifully in the yard. This is exactly where many people make a mistake while trying to do something helpful. They see a weathered board come back to life, and they assume the same mixture must also be perfect for a dining table, a chair, an old cabinet, or any finished wood surface inside the house. But indoor wood tells a different story. It ages differently. It is touched more often. It is seen from much closer distances. It lives in a less punishing environment. Because of that, what it needs is different as well. Outdoor wood often needs help with a surface that has been worn down by sunlight, rain, oxygen, and repeated wet and dry exposure. Indoor furniture usually does not carry that same kind of damage. Many pieces have simply lost richness, become dull-dried slightly over time, or started to look tired because the surface has not been cared for in a long while. In that setting, the goal is no longer to pull away a weathered gray layer. The goal is to restore warmth, depth, softness, and a natural look that still feels right when a hand touches it. That is why the indoor formula has to move in a different direction. It needs to be gentler, more refined, and better suited to the kind of beauty people want from furniture that lives in the home. A more suitable approach for indoor wood is a mixture based on tung oil beeswax and just enough solvent to make the blend workable. In that structure, tung oil is the part that creates lasting depth in the surface. It does more than darken the wood in a pleasing way. It helps produce a natural finish that feels stronger, cleaner, and more appropriate for furniture used in daily life. When light moves across a tabletop or a cabinet door, the effect is not that of an artificial shine sitting on top. Instead, it feels as though the grain itself is giving off a quiet glow from below the surface. That kind of beauty is very different from simply making an outdoor board look less gray. Beeswax completes that effect. It gives the surface a softness that is easy to see even before it is touched. When it is applied properly and lightly buffed with a clean cloth, it does not turn the piece into something glossy and industrial. It simply helps the wood feel calmer, smoother, and more cared for by human hands. This is where the viewer can fully sense the difference between outdoor recovery and indoor care. One is about helping a surface that has been punished by weather. The other is about restoring quiet beauty to an object that lives close to people every day. Because that difference matters so much, the viewer should keep one simple rule in mind. The fact that both things are made of wood does not mean they should be treated the same way. A dining table inside the house should not be handled like a board that has spent years out in the rain. A finished surface should also never be covered with a stronger mixture without testing first in a hidden area. This clear separation is what makes restoration more intelligent, safer, and more beautiful. And once that distinction is fully understood, a larger meaning starts to come into view. Simple formulas like these still matter today, not because they are old, but because they remain useful when they are matched to the right material in the right place for the right purpose. Now that the difference has been made clear, what remains is not simply two formulas for two different wooden surfaces. What remains is a new way of seeing the objects that are aging quietly around us. Outdoors is a story shaped by sunlight, rain, oxygen, wind, and time, all working slowly against the surface day after day. Indoors is a different story, gentler in appearance, but just as easy to ignore, where wood gradually loses richness, warmth, and that soft depth people rarely notice until it has already faded. Once that difference is understood, the viewer is no longer standing in front of an old board or a tired table with uncertainty. They now have a way to distinguish one condition from another. They have a way to observe. More importantly, they have a way to respond with intention. The value in this journey does not come only from the fact that the materials can be inexpensive. It is true that the cost may be far lower than what many people imagine when they think about restoring wood. But if the meaning stopped at saving money, it would still be too small. The larger value is the feeling of understanding the material with your own hands. It is knowing why a surface has aged in the way it has. It is knowing when outdoor wood needs help recovering from weathering, when indoor furniture needs warmth and quiet depth restored, and when it is wiser to stop before doing harm to something that could have been preserved more carefully. That knowledge changes the way a person works. It brings confidence where there used to be hesitation. It turns a process that once felt complicated into something that can begin with ordinary tools, patient observation, and a little care. There is a reason simple approaches like these have survived for so long. It is not because old methods are automatically better than modern ones. It is not because tradition should be romanticized for its own sake. These methods continue to matter because in many situations, they still answer the material honestly. A weathered board outside does not read the label on a bottle. A dining table indoors does not care what product is currently fashionable. Wood responds to what reaches it, to how it is treated, to whether the person working on it is thoughtful or careless. When the viewer begins to understand that restoration stops feeling like a flashy transformation made only to impress, it becomes something more grounded. It becomes an act built on attention, patience, and respect for the material itself. From there, the meaning of old objects begins to shift as well. A silver gray board in the yard is no longer just something waiting to be replaced. An old wooden chair in the house is no longer only a piece that has passed its best years. They become objects that quietly ask whether anyone is willing to slow down enough to notice the value still left in them. The person watching this video may be someone who has seen a deck fade over several seasons and never knew where to begin. It may be someone with an old table tied to years of ordinary family life, now looking duller and more tired than it once did. It may also be someone who simply loves the feeling of bringing back something that seemed almost useless with nothing more than time, care, and their own hands. Whatever their situation may be, what they receive here is more than a small practical tip. They receive a way of looking at old things with more patience and less haste. In the end, wood does not need grand promises. It does not need exaggeration. It only needs to be understood correctly, matched with the right treatment, and cared for in a way that fits the life it has lived. Outdoors is one kind of work. Indoors is another. When that difference is respected, a beautiful result stops being a matter of luck. It becomes the natural outcome of understanding and care. And sometimes keeping an old object is not only about spending less than it would cost to replace it. Sometimes it is the clearest and most graceful way to prove that you still know how to recognize value before it disappears.